what upbringing did you discover that Alexander Hamilton received in the Caribbean as a young man?
So the argument really starts, as any argument about Jewish identity, with a mother. Hamilton's mother, Rachel, is not born Jewish, but she marries a Danish merchant in the Danish West Indies named Johann Michael Levine. And some Hamilton historians dispute the idea that Levine was Jewish. I make the case in favor of Levine's Jewish identity based on a number of details about his life, including the fact that Hamilton's own grandson explicitly identifies him as a, quote, rich Danish Jew. Now, Rachel marries Johann and bears him a son, Peter Levine, a year after their wedding. And this son, Peter, is not infant baptized, which was universal practice for island Christians. Years later, as an adult, Peter Levine undertakes an adult baptism under circumstances that only make sense if he's converting to Christianity. Now, Rachel has a troubled marriage. She ends up fleeing from the Danish West Indies, leaving behind her husband, Johann, and their son, Peter. And she winds up ultimately on the island of Nevis, giving birth to Alexander out of wedlock to a Scottish colonist named James Hamilton. But there are compelling reasons to think that Rachel converted to Judaism to marry Johann and then retains this Jewish identity and passes it on to Alexander. For one, if he was Jewish, we would expect to see circumcision or evidence thereof. If he was Christian, we would expect to see a baptism. Unfortunately, there are no extant circumcision records. There are, however, surviving baptismal records, and while they're incomplete, those that we have show no entry for Alexander. But more compelling than that is the fact that Rachel enrolls Alexander in a Jewish school, where, as I mentioned before, he begins rudimentary study of the Torah in the original Hebrew. And we know this because Hamilton tells his children that when he was little, the teacher would put him on a table, so presumably they would be eye level, and he would recite to her the 10 Commandments in the original Hebrew. And this at a time when we don't have recorded instances of Christian children attending Jewish schools. We have every reason to believe that the Jewish school on Nevis would have only taken in Alexander if they considered him one of their own. And so I'm condensing 7 years of research into a couple of minutes, but this is the outline of an argument that there is a strong presumption based on these facts that Alexander Hamilton lived as a Jew in at least some senses of that term for at least some stretches of his life.